There's a moment many leaders don't talk about. The strategy deck is solid. The market logic makes sense. The numbers check out, and yet execution stalls. Not because the plan was wrong, but because the people side was underestimated. Welcome back to BizBlend, where we explore what is really take to grow businesses without burning out the people inside them. I am Yusuf, and today I am joined by Sriram Mangudi, who works at the intersection of strategy, leadership, and human capital risk. His work focuses on helping investors and leadership teams align talent, culture, and people systems so strategy actually translates into enterprise value. We are talking about the human side of strategy execution and why even the best plans collapse without strong people leadership. And with that, I welcome my guest, Sriram Mangudi, to the show.
Thank you, Yusuf. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Perfect, sir. So I'm very excited to get started and let's just get into it.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me on this show today.
So there's a belief in many organizations that if the strategy is clear enough, people will naturally align. From what you have seen, where does that assumption break down?
Well, I think organizations are really good at defining goals, defining what they're going to do to their investors. They're very good, especially if you're publicly listed. Your numbers are measured every quarter. But I think when you break down further and you look at different types of organizations, and especially in the world that I'm in, what we are starting to see in our consulting world, I work for a company called Consult MSG. And, what happens in publicly listed strategic acquirers in the world that I live in versus privately owned or private equity backed companies in terms of where strategy breaks down when it comes to leadership. Most organizations really good. They have as far as, communicating to investors what they're going to be doing, what kind of returns and what performance they're going to be doing. Organizations are very good at, being measured quarter on quarter on how they did versus the previous quarter, the previous year. But when it comes to dealing with leadership and aligning them to the purpose of the organization, what value you're looking to create for customers in a world that's changing with technology all the time, the value proposition is changing, the whole way we buy products and services are changing. There's a lot more that needs to get done to align leadership, which is very different from communicating expectations in commercial terms to the external world financially. So I think that especially when we look at organizations that have different owners and stakeholders driving the success of the business, especially if you look at private equity with different funds, with multiple investors, it becomes a lot more complex and challenging to align leadership and strategy.
Mm. What tends to happen when leaders over-invest in strategy design but under-invest in leadership readiness?
Absolutely. When you look at this gap between investing in strategy and growth versus investing in leadership, you tend to see a lot of breakdown on your ability to retain and stabilize the organization with quality leadership. Take private equity, for instance. 70% of the hires for the C-suite of leadership in private equity are external hires. It indicates fundamentally a dissatisfaction and a discomfort with existing internal leadership and their fit for the strategy that you're looking to drive for an organization. In strategic organizations, when you're going for mergers and acquisitions, you see a completely different philosophy where there is a strong impetus to drive internal leadership and position that for future success. And you also see the difference in the willingness to invest in leadership for the long term versus leadership for the short term, depending on the kind of organization that you're dealing with. So I think there's two different at least distinct behaviors you see in strategic organizations versus, I would say, the private investing one.
So, what I could get from this is that even clarity can backfire if the leadership system isn't equipped to carry it.
Definitely. If the clarity on whether your leadership is a fit and can be developed, just like you can invest in a business and add new platforms to your business to grow your business, the same way you need to make the same investments in leadership. And not every organization, is willing to do that when the money's on the table.
Yeah, that's true. In real organizations, how does weak people leadership actually show up day to day during execution?
So the character of leadership, as always, is in a moment of crisis when the organization is under stress and the organization has to pivot or transform. A mature business will have leaders that tend to do well in existing business models, businesses growing at an incremental rate. When a business is looking to transform, when a business is under stress to perform, that's when the true character of leadership, that's where we step in from the human capital side, the HR side, and the leadership to really bring a different quality of character to driving change within the organization. I think that's the the inflection point for an organization to grow.
Yeah. Are there any specific moments like integration, restructures, or rapid growth phases where these gaps become impossible to ignore?
Definitely, and we tend to see that especially in mergers and acquisitions, as well as in add-on acquisitions and platform builds in the private equity world. Uh, when you look at the shift from the transaction to the transformation phase in an integration, when a company has just recently acquired another company, there are usually the first 3 to 6 months is all about getting your leadership team in place. If you look at the CEO and what they have to do in the first 6 months of an acquisition as part of integration, it's all about putting the right leaders in place to stabilize the business first, but then more importantly, set it up for growth, because the expectations for a business in its growth and acquisition integration phase is really usually 2x to 3x of current revenues. And that places a very different set of expectations from a mature organization. So that's one of the big things that early on leaders must be assessed just as you're about to acquire an organization, and also be assessed to decide whether these are the leaders that are going to be part of the future. These are leaders that need to be, for want of a better word, exited because or replaced because you need the right kind of leadership in place to drive the right success profile for the future organization. And you also need to be able to retain some of your most outstanding leaders. All of these three challenges are crucial when driving integration and transformation in an organization.
Yeah. That's powerful because from the outside it often looks like performance issues. But internally it's confusion, fear, or misalignment that is the cause of it.
Absolutely. Misalignment is very often understated, and it is very accentuated when you look at privately owned organizations, especially private equity. Unlike publicly listed or public companies, in private equity, you have a different set of alignments that need to, take place very quickly early into an acquisition. So, in addition to the relationship between the CEO and their leadership team in a portfolio company for private equity, you additionally have the relationship with the PE sponsor, the operating partner, the deal partner, and even the investors and the PE board. All of these add a very, very different layer of complexity to alignment between leadership. And it's a very different way of driving traction and uh, alignment towards the common purpose of driving growth for an organization, especially in the private world. And that's something that for me personally has been very interesting. as since most of my career has been in publicly listed organizations, and discovering and working towards driving alignment in privately owned organizations is definitely a big challenge, but also an exciting challenge given the complexity.
Yeah. You work with sprint based assessments and deeper integration programs. Where should leaders realistically start if they want people leadership to support the strategy?
Some of it is very straightforward and simple, and rather than, and in the private equity world, especially that we work with, results and agility are key. The private equity world is usually looking to close multiple deals in the course of a year. And therefore, the first thing you need is as simple as anything else, especially in mid-sized organizations. Do you have an org chart? What does that org chart look like? How many of the names on the org chart have clear responsibilities? Who's responsible for finance? Who's responsible for sales? Who's responsible for marketing? Might sound like simple questions, but they need to be addressed. The next question is, what kind of leadership is ready for the platform or the organization that's being built for the future? Do you have a good sense of that? And if you don't have a mechanism to address that and you're purely relying on, let's say, a founder promoter, you're going to be making a lot of leadership decision mistakes that are usually very tough to address until you get a year to 18 months into the deal, at which point you're really looking at a lot of new challenging metrics that are not common to mature organizations. So the second part would be really about getting a very strong assessment of leadership readiness for the future organization. And then the third part is really about aligning strategy around what the PE sponsor and the portfolio company have to drive commonly to drive a commonality of purpose towards the strategy for the new organization. All of these three are very crucial for setting up the leadership for success.
Yeah. What's one practical shift that leaders can make quickly that has an outsized impact on execution?
I think the first biggest shift that, any leader being positioned for success has to always is to understand where is the strategy of this organization pivoting towards to create value. Knowing which part of the organization is being positioned for value creation and understanding that irrespective of whether you're a CFO or whether you are HR or whether you are the head of IT or whether you are in the CEO yourself, getting a very strong understanding of the commercial strategy that drives value is probably the most important thing for a leader to, be positioned for successful.
Yeah. Even with the right intent, execution gets messy. What separates organizations that recover from people related setbacks from that those spiral in?
I think execution, as they say, eats strategy for breakfast. And therefore, an organization that has very strong operating norms is usually going to be able to find ways to recover from people's setbacks. So that means that if an organization has strong governance mechanisms where they have good check-ins from, on a monthly, quarterly, or weekly basis on the most crucial drivers of their business, meaning you know who your customers are, which customers are paying you on time. You know who your drivers for value are in your products and your services. You know where you're starting to lose money very quickly, and you're not, going through 15 different reports to find out, where the problem is in your strategy as far as cash goes or profit goes in your business. I think organizations that have a very strong operating norm and governance are usually the ones that can find ways in which they can recover. The other thing I would add, of course, is leaders need to go beyond their function, work fairly boundarylessly. So organizations that have very siloed leaders who are, very strong in functional expertise but have a very poor enterprise mindset are going to struggle when it comes to this. I think building a very strong enterprise mindset along with a very strong operating culture are going to be the two key differentiators when faced with challenges of the kind where you're facing people setbacks.
That's true. For leaders who feel that their strategy is sound, but execution feels heavy or even stalled, what's one question they should ask themselves about their leadership impact?
I think, first of all, the first thing to check for the leader is, are they communicating clearly? Does the team that they work with have clarity on what they need to be doing towards the goals of the organization? That's one thing, first and foremost, they need to start. If Even if they've communicated it and the message is not landing, I think the next thing for a leader to ask is, what do they need to change in the way they communicate and influence expectations in the organization? Those are the two things, first and foremost, that in an organization that's in a rapid phase of change, the most important thing is for the leader to communicate the right expectations. The next thing, of course, if this part is clear, is, do you have the right people or the right leadership, in place to drive the kind of change or expectations for the organization? That will be a second checkpoint.
Okay. Hiram, for listeners who want to explore your work or continue this conversation, where can they find you?
I'm there on LinkedIn. I'm available. My email is smangudi at consultmsg.com, as simple as that. And you can also call me. I can share my mobile if you're in the United States. But LinkedIn, I guess, would be the best way to reach me.
Okay, perfect. And to all our listeners, all these links are in the show notes. So just go and check those out. Shiram, is there any last message that you want to leave us with?
I think this is a very exciting time for leaders to drive growth, but more importantly, for organizations to define truly what kind of leadership they believe in. We are in a world where, you know, people's time in leadership roles and tenure is under threat from typical norms from 5, 10 years ago. But what is going to define true quality of leadership is going to be those who are able to enforce leadership behaviors through a common culture. So I think it's really exciting times for leaders, and especially the world that we live in as far as private equity is concerned, where leadership is now taking place through alignment across a very complex set of stakeholders.
Strategy sets direction, but people leadership demands whether that direction ever becomes reality. And if today's conversation resonated, take a moment to reflect on where execution in your organization is slowing down and what the human system underneath it might be asking for. This has been BizBlend. I am Yusuf with my guest Sriram Mangudi. Join us next time as we continue blending strategy, leadership, and real world execution.